It is great to have you with us today, the learner. Usually, when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there is this comforting expectation of uh, precision.
Right, like an engineering problem
Yeah,
almost.
exactly. It's like engineering.
Hmm.
You break your arm, you go to the hospital, the x-ray shows that jagged white line on the black film, and the doctor just points a pen at it and says, there it is. That is the problem.
And human beings love that binary, right? I mean, the bone is broken or the bone is intact. We can cast it, we can fix it. It gives us this immediate sense of control over our own suffering.
Totally. But then you step into the world of neurodevelopment and early emotional trauma and the architecture of human personality, and suddenly that x-ray machine is just utterly useless.
Oh, entirely. There is no jagged white line.
Right. You can't see the fracture. But the patient is standing right in front of you, basically emotionally bleeding out. And they often have absolutely no idea why. So today, we're exploring why the most successful, driven people you know, the people who seem to have it all together, maybe even the person staring back at you in the mirror, why they often feel completely inextricably empty inside.
And to do this, we are getting into some of the most paradigm-shifting psychological literature of the 20th century. Specifically, we are looking at the work of psychoanalyst Alice Miller and excerpts from her landmark book, The Drama of the Gifted Child, The Search for the True Self.
Which is just a monumental piece of writing.
It really is. I mean, this is a text that fundamentally dismantled and rebuilt how the psychiatric community and eventually the wider public understood the very concept of what constitutes a quote-unquote good childhood.
Okay, let's unpack this. The core premise we are looking at today is heavy, but it is deeply necessary. We're looking at the hidden emotional costs of those supposedly perfect childhoods.
Right.
And Miller makes a staggering claim right out of the gate. She argues that the only enduring actual weapon we have against mental illness, depression, and this pervasive modern sense of alienation is the emotional discovery of the truth about our unique childhood history.
Yeah, and it sounds like a simple directive, right? Just look at your past. But it is monumentally difficult to execute. Because, well, human beings are unparalleled masters of illusion, especially when it comes to our own origin stories.
We really want to believe the best about where we came from.
Exactly. History, both on a global scale and a personal one, shows us that illusions just sneak in everywhere. And they sneak in because the unvarnished truth of our early, helpless lives often feels entirely unbearable to our adult minds.
So if you're listening to this, think about your own day-to-day life for a second. Think about the unexplained anxieties that flare up when your boss sends a vague email.
Oh, that dreaded "we need to talk" message.
Right. Or think about feeling like a complete imposter in a room full of people who actually respect you. Or finding yourself trapped in the exact same toxic relationship dynamic for like the third time in a row.
We almost always categorize these as adult problems.
We do. We think we are just failing at managing our adult lives. Or that we need a better productivity system or, I don't know, a new wellness routine.
Right. But Miller's work suggests something far more invisible is happening. She suggests we are completely unaware that invisible chains from our earliest days, literally from when we were nonverbal infants and toddlers, are actually the directors behind the camera of our adult lives.
It's wild to think about that an infant experience is directing your career right now.
What's fascinating here is the paradox of avoidance, which is the engine driving this entire phenomenon. Because as adults, we instinctively avoid the pain of our past because, quite simply, it hurts.
Nobody wants to feel that.
Exactly. But avoiding the pain of the past ensures that we remain its prisoner. We use enormous amounts of subconscious energy to keep the basement door locked, so to speak.
And Miller makes a crucial point here, right? This doesn't just result in quiet, private suffering.
No, not at all. The repression of early emotional deprivation or brutal abuse actually drives many people to destroy their own lives. And in many cases, it spills over into destroying the lives of others.
Right, because if you refuse to look at the monster inside your own house, you have to project it somewhere else.
Yes. She points out an unconscious thirst for revenge that permeates society. You see individuals engaging in extreme acts of destruction, burning down homes, destroying businesses, physically attacking others.
And people always try to find a rational political reason for that stuff.
Right. But what is vital to understand is that these acts of violence are frequently utilized by the perpetrators to hide their own internal truth from themselves. They are in a state of desperation, trying to avoid feeling the profound despair and powerlessness of the tormented child they once were.
So they dress it up.
Exactly. They dress this outward violence up in socially acceptable or at least ideologically rigid costumes. They might call it patriotism, or they might hide behind fervent religious beliefs or political dogma. But at its foundational core, it is repressed childhood agony lashing out at a substitute target.
That makes an uncomfortable amount of sense when you look at the news on any given day. If you can project your internal terror onto a political enemy or a neighboring country, you get to feel powerful and righteous rather than small and terrified.
Precisely. You manufacture a threat you can fight to avoid the one you couldn't?
But she also talks about how this avoidance turns inward, into the physical body itself. The lengths to which people will go to prove to themselves that they cannot be hurt. And the example she gives is pretty shocking.
Yes, the physical manifestations of this denial are chilling. There is an active continuation of the torture that was once inflicted upon them, but with a critical twist. Because they are now the adults orchestrating the scenario, they perceive these activities as liberation or empowerment.
And this is where she brings up the nipple-piercing thing.
Right. Yes. Miller provides a very specific example that captures this perfectly. She discusses women who willingly allow their nipples to be pierced with heavy metal rings for newspaper or magazine photographs.
Which, I mean, sounds incredibly painful.
It is. But the key here isn't the act itself, but the psychological framing. These women will smile proudly for the camera, and they will explicitly claim that they felt absolutely no pain when the procedure was done, and further, that it was actually quote-unquote fun for them.
See, when I read that section, I immediately thought, are they just putting on a brave face for the photographer? Like, they don't want to admit it hurts, but Miller isn't saying they're lying, is she?
No, she is very clear on this. One need not doubt the truth of their statements. In that specific moment, their nervous system literally does not register the pain.
Wow. So their brain just blocks it.
Yes. And the mechanism behind that numbness is tragic. If you think about a little girl who is sexually exploited or physically abused by a parent, for instance, she is trapped. She cannot physically escape, and she relies on her abuser for her literal survival, for food, for shelter.
So she has no way out.
Right. So to survive the psychological horror, she often has to distort reality. She has to imagine that the abuse is somehow fun, or she has to completely detach her mind from her nerve endings.
Just literally disconnect the alarm system.
Exactly. Fast forward to adulthood, and she will unconsciously go to any lengths to avoid feeling the real unresolved pain of that little girl. She numbs out entirely.
Is the ultimate survival mechanism, but it just calcifies into a prison. And while that is a stark physical example, this exact same mechanism shows up in incredibly common private ways all around us.
Oh, absolutely. Everywhere.
Like the person who is constantly fleeing their internal landscape with the help of alcohol or drugs, or, the relentless overachiever.
The workaholic.
Yeah. The workaholic who needs a constant thrill, a new startup, a new marathon to run, just to keep the quiet at bay. Because they know, on some deep, unarticulated level, that even one single moment of stillness means the burning loneliness of their childhood might finally creep in.
And they fear that feeling more than they fear burning their health to the ground, because that fear is primal.
Right.
To a fully grown adult, sitting alone with sad thoughts is just, an unpleasant evening. But to a small child, an infant, abandonment and profound emotional loneliness literally equates to death.
Because an infant cannot survive alone in the wild.
Exactly. So when the adult feels that old childhood loneliness creeping in, they aren't just feeling sad. Their nervous system is registering a biological terror. They're running from a perceived threat of annihilation.
Okay, so we can clearly see the damage in cases of severe abuse or neglect. But the real mind-blowing shift in Miller's work is when she turns her lens away from the obviously broken homes.
This is the crux of her argument, yes.
She focuses on the people who claim to have never experienced a drop of childhood pain at all. The ones who sit on a therapist's couch or at a dinner party and say, oh, my childhood. It was idyllic. I had great parents. Everything was perfect.
The people Miller refers to as the poor rich child. And this is where her work truly upends traditional psychiatric assumptions.
How so?
Because historically, if someone had a wealthy, stable, polite family, society assumed they were fine. There was no visible trauma to point to.
Right, but these people are walking into therapy totally successful by all societal metrics. I mean, they have the degrees, the prestigious jobs, the beautiful families, and they claim they had a protected, wonderful childhood.
Yes.
And yet they are deeply, profoundly depressed. These are the kids who were the absolute pride of their parents. The anecdotes Miller shares are wild. These kids were toilet trained in the first year of their lives.
Which is incredibly early.
Yeah. And by the time they were 3 or 4, they were so quote-unquote mature, They were capably helping to raise their younger siblings. They were the golden children. Everyone in the neighborhood admired them.
And if you look at prevailing societal attitudes, these individuals should be the blueprint for mental health. They should have a rock-solid sense of self-assurance.
Right. They did everything right.
And on the surface, they do excellently in everything they undertake. They are admired by their peers, they are envied by their neighbors, but behind this gleaming facade lurks a profound depression, a heavy, persistent feeling of emptiness.
Just a total void.
Yes, a sense of self-alienation and this lingering, terrifying feeling that despite all their accomplishments, their life simply has no meaning.
Which is the ultimate paradox. If you were praised your entire life, if your parents told you how great you were every time you brought home an A+ or won a recital, why on earth would you feel empty? Where is the deficit coming from?
Well, the deficit comes from the fact that they were not actually loved for who they truly were. They were praised for their talents, they were rewarded for their achievements, and most importantly, for their ability to be convenient, quiet, and helpful to their parents.
Oh, wow. So it's transactional.
Very much so. They developed what Miller profoundly calls a drug of grandiosity. The praise became their oxygen. As long as they are the superstar, as long as they are being useful and admired, they feel okay.
They feel a semblance of existence.
Right. But the moment they aren't on top, the moment they fail to live up to some impossible ideal image, the entire structure collapses. They crash into acute anxiety, deep guilt, and a shame that feels like it might swallow them whole.
Because the admiration they received wasn't actually love. It was conditional approval disguised as love. And to really grasp why this breaks a human being's internal compass, we have to look at the exact mechanism of this emotional exploitation. Because there is a concept from Donald Winnicott that you brought up when we were reviewing the sources, and it just completely changed how I visualize early childhood.
Oh, Donald Winnicott is essential here. He was a highly influential pediatrician and psychoanalyst who worked extensively with infants and mothers.
What did he figure out?
He offered us this beautiful but incredibly fragile image of early psychological development. I want you to imagine a mother gazing down at the baby in her arms. The baby is gazing back up at the mother's face.
Okay, picturing it.
Now, what is the baby actually looking for? Winnicott posits that the baby is looking to find themselves. A healthy, emotionally secure mother looks at this unique, helpless little being, and her face acts as a responsive mirror.
It reflects the baby's internal state back to them.
Exactly.
So it's this incredibly intimate feedback loop. The baby smiles, and the mom's face lights up with joy. The baby cries or furrows its brow, and the mom's face immediately registers concern and empathy.
Yes. And through that mirroring, the baby learns, my feelings are real. They have an impact on the outside world. I exist, and my existence is valid.
Which is the foundation of a true self.
It is. But the tragedy occurs when we alter the mother's internal state. What if the mother is emotionally insecure? What if she is carrying her own heavy burden of repressed childhood trauma, her own desperate need for validation?
Oh man, so she's bringing all her baggage to the crib.
Exactly. In that scenario, when she looks down at the baby, she isn't really looking at the child at all. She's projecting her own unmet expectations, her own deep fears, and her own desperate need for comfort onto this tiny infant.
So when the baby gazes up into the mother's face, seeking a reflection of their own budding emotions, what do they find?
They do not find themselves. The baby finds the mother's projections. They see the mother's anxiety or the mother's need for the baby to be quiet so she isn't overwhelmed, or the mother's need for the baby to smile so she feels like a good mother.
And because of that, the baby remains entirely without a mirror.
And this is the invisible tragedy. For the rest of their entire life, that person will be seeking this mirror in vain. Because every human child has a primary, non-negotiable biological need from the very beginning of life, to be regarded and respected as the person they really are at any given time.
Not what they can do for others.
Right. Not how well they perform, but what they genuinely feel.
I was trying to think of how to translate this into an adult feeling. And the best analogy I could come up with is that it's like being born into a high-stress corporate job that you never applied for.
Oh, that's a brilliant way to put it.
Right. You show up day one on Earth expecting to be mentored and cared for. And instead you realize, on a pre-verbal pure survival level, that the company is going under, the CEO is panicking, and you have been hired to be the human emotional shock absorber for the entire building.
Yes.
You have to manage your parents' emotions before you even know what an emotion is.
That analogy captures the heavy burden. perfectly because they are not just a shock absorber, they are the entire emotional power grid for the house. If the mother lacks respect and echoing from her own childhood, she unconsciously uses her infant as a substitute figure to provide it.
Wow.
And the newborn baby is completely, terrifyingly dependent on the parents. Since the parents' care is essential for the baby's literal physical existence, the baby will do absolutely all he can to avoid losing them.
They just adapt.
The infant will muster all of his internal resources, adapting brilliantly and seamlessly, much like a small plant desperately twisting its stem to find a sliver of sunlight. The baby adapts to secure what feels like love, but what is in reality just emotional exploitation.
This dynamic is so perfectly and painfully illustrated in the case study Miller shares about a patient named Barbara. Because when you read Barbara's story, you see just how thick the illusion of the perfect childhood can be.
Barbara's case is a classic example of the false narrative.
Yeah, so Barbara enters therapy at 35 years old. She's a mother of 4, and her initial intake sounds like a Hallmark card. She tells the therapist she had this incredibly affectionate, warm-hearted mother who sacrificed absolutely everything for her family.
A very common starting point in therapy.
Right. She talks about how her mother used to speak openly to Barbara about her own troubles from a very early age, treating her like an equal. She boasts about how people in their community constantly flocked to her mother for advice and how her mother was supposedly so endlessly proud of Barbara.
But if we look at that description through Winnicott's lens, the red flags are waving violently.
Big time.
Even in that highly idealized description, the damage is evident. The mother speaking openly to a small child about the mother's own adult troubles. That is a profound boundary violation.
Yeah, that shouldn't happen.
No. That is role reversal. That is the mother using the child as a confidant, essentially turning a little girl into a tiny, captive therapist to manage her own adult anxiety.
Exactly. And the cracking of this facade begins because Barbara is currently plagued by these terrible, recurring anxiety dreams that her elderly mother is going to die.
The unconscious is starting to signal.
Right. But as therapy progresses, the true, unvarnished picture of the mother starts to emerge from beneath the floorboards. When Barbara starts remembering the details of her toilet training, which notably she was pushed into incredibly early so her mother could brag about it, she suddenly experiences her mother not as warm and sacrificing, but as demanding, controlling, petty, and incredibly hard to please.
The mirror shatters.
Yeah, she starts to realize that her mother's constant anxious concern wasn't love, it was a leash. It was a way to control Barbara's every move.
The real breakthrough in Barbara's therapy, however, is devastating. It all crystallizes around one specific memory from when Barbara was just 10 years old.
I have to admit, I had to put the text down and walk away for a minute when I read this part. It is so hard to digest.
It's a horrific emotional abuse.
It is. So Barbara remembers coming home from school. It happens to be her mother's birthday. She walks into the house and finds her mother lying completely still on the floor, eyes closed, not moving.
A 10-year-old child finding this.
10 years old. Barbara is absolutely terrified. She thinks her mother has collapsed and died. She is thrown into absolute panic and agony, crying out for her mom. And then her mother just opens her eyes.
She was pretending.
Pretending. She looks up at her terrified, sobbing child, smiles with genuine delight, and says, "You gave me the most precious birthday gift. Now I know that you love me, that somebody loves me."
It is an act of sheer emotional cruelty. The mother was entirely willing to simulate her own death, to inflict the ultimate primal terror of abandonment on her own child, just to extract a theatrical performance of love to soothe her own bottomless insecurity.
It's sick.
The mother's need for a mirror was so desperate she shattered her daughter's reality to get a reflection.
And the most tragic part is how Barbara processed this. For decades, right up until therapy at age 35, Barbara didn't feel anger about this incident. She felt pity.
Yes, the defense mechanism.
The pity completely blanketed and hid her own rage. She carried this narrative of, well, my poor tragic mother, she just needed to know she was loved. Therapy finally dismantled that defense mechanism and allowed Barbara to feel the righteous indignation, the fury, and the horror of what was actually done to her mind that day.
Which forces us to ask a mechanical question about the human psyche. If a child like Barbara is drafted into becoming the emotional caretaker for a parent, what actually happens to that child's own natural feelings?
Right.
What happens to a 10-year-old's anger when she is tricked into thinking her mother is dead? What happens to a toddler's normal jealousy or their natural fear of the dark?
I mean, they obviously don't just vanish into thin air. You can't just delete an emotion.
No, you cannot. They are buried alive. which leads us into the physical toll of this kind of repression and what Miller profoundly refers to as the lost world of feelings.
Let's dig into this lost world, because to me, here's where it gets really interesting. This is where the psychology intersects with biology in a really fascinating way.
It's the physiological cost of avoidance.
Right. We are talking about highly intelligent, remarkably sensitive people here. Miller points out this bizarre contradiction in her patients. These observant, brilliant kids can sit on the couch and describe to her in photographic detail the exact way the afternoon sunlight hit the bright green grass in their backyard when they were 4 years old.
Their memory for aesthetics is flawless.
Crystalline. But magically at age 8, they somehow, quote-unquote, didn't notice anything about their mother being heavily pregnant. Or they claimed they felt no jealousy whatsoever when a new sibling was born and siphoned off all the family's attention.
They block out the emotional threat.
She even mentions a case of a 2-year-old child who sits perfectly quiet, motionless, just quote-unquote being good, while armed soldiers force their way into the house and aggressively search it.
What you are describing is a highly evolved selective blindness. The child develops the vital art of not experiencing feelings, and we must understand the rule of emotional physics here.
Okay, what is the rule?
A child can only experience their feelings when there's somebody there who accepts them fully, understands them, and supports them through the feeling.
Oh, wow.
If that supportive person is missing, it's expressing fear about soldiers or jealousy about a baby means the mother gets overwhelmed, withdraws her affection, or punishes the child, then the child must repress those emotions immediately.
Because, as we established, risking the loss of the mother's love is a literal survival risk.
Yes, and the tragedy is they can't even experience the feelings secretly, locked away just for themselves. The conscious mind fails to experience them at all, but those feelings do not evaporate. They are converted. They are stored in the body's cells as rudimentary biological information.
Now, I have to push back here, or at least ask you to clarify the limits of this, because I can totally understand a clever 8-year-old realizing, okay, mom is super stressed about the new baby, she's crying a lot, I better pretend I'm not jealous so I don't make things worse.
Right. That's a conscious social choice.
Exactly. That is complex, but it's fundamentally a social adaptation. But Miller's suggesting this goes much deeper. Can an infant, a tiny preverbal baby, truly suppress fundamental biological drives? Is this just about hiding complex emotions like jealousy, or does this suppression go all the way down to baseline biology?
It goes all the way down to baseline biology. The nervous system prioritizes attachment over almost everything else because without attachment, there is no food or shelter anyway. Miller provides a chilling case study that answers your exact question. The story of Beatrice.
Yes, the diary.
Yes. Beatrice was a 58-year-old woman who came to therapy suffering from severe, lifelong depression and chronic anorexia. She was the daughter of missionary parents, raised in a highly structured religious environment.
Very strict.
Very. And during the course of her therapy, it was revealed that Beatrice's mother had meticulously kept a diary of her early childhood. In this diary, the mother wrote with immense pride and self-congratulation that at 3 months old, let that sink in, 3 months little Beatrice had already learned to suppress her hunger and wait patiently to be fed without crying.
That is just wild to me. A 3-month-old overriding the literal biological imperative to cry when their stomach is empty. That goes against millions of years of evolutionary programming.
But it perfectly aligns with the evolutionary programming of survival within her specific environment.
How so?
Why did the baby stop crying? Because the infant's discontent, her crying, her normal infantile anger at being hungry, aroused deep uncertainty and anxiety in the mother. The mother couldn't handle the noise. It made her feel out of control or inadequate.
So the baby reads that.
Yes. Baby Beatrice, at 90 days old, learned through repeated subtle cues that in order to keep her mother close and prevent her from withdrawing, she had to extinguish her own biological needs. She learned exactly what she was not supposed to feel.
Unbelievable.
And that profound suppression doesn't vanish. It lies dormant and manifests decades later. In Beatrice's case, it manifests as anorexia, the literal pathological denial of hunger and crushing depression. The body keeps the ledger, even if the conscious mind has lost the key.
And if the conscious mind stubbornly refuses to read the ledger, the unconscious has to find other ways to leak the information out. It finds back channels.
It always does.
And Miller points out how beautifully, and sometimes terrifyingly, this leaks out through art and through dreams. She brings up the biography of the famous British sculptor Henry Moore, which I found fascinating.
It is a brilliant observation. Most traditional biographers treat childhood as this blank, irrelevant prologue. They assume the real life of an artist begins at puberty, or when they discover their medium.
Right. But Miller looks at the roots of the tree, not just the branches. Henry Moore describes in his own memoirs how, when he was a very small boy, he used to regularly massage his mother's back with oil to soothe her severe rheumatism.
A very tactile, physical memory.
Yeah. And Miller connects this direct, tactile childhood memory to the aesthetic of his world-famous sculptures. If you aren't familiar with Henry Moore's work, he is famous for these massive, monumental, abstract, reclining women. And they all share this distinct proportion.
They do.
They have tiny, almost pin-like heads and enormous, expansive, mountainous backs. Miller looked at these sculptures and realized she was looking at the mother through the small boy's eyes.
The perspective of the child.
Literally, the head of the mother is high above him, rendered tiny in diminishing perspective, while her back is close before his face, enormously enlarged and dominating his field of vision. It's literally the exact visual and tactile perspective of a small boy looking up while rubbing his mother's back.
Now, it's important to note that Moore's memory of massaging his mother wasn't necessarily traumatic. It was an act of care that survived intact in his conscious memory, and it fueled his creative output.
It wasn't repressed.
Right. But it proves the underlying mechanism beautifully. Early, repetitive bodily experiences endure in the unconscious and heavily dictate adult expression and perspective.
Yeah.
For Miller's patients, however, those early experiences were not acts of gentle care. They were traumatic emotional amputations. So they are locked in darkness. And they leak out not in beautiful bronze sculptures, but through powerful, terrifying nightmares. Dreams that reveal what Miller calls the as-if personality.
The false self, the mask that grew into a face.
Exactly. The as-if personality develops to reveal only what is expected of it. It fuses so completely with the parents' expectations that the true original self is paralyzed. Think of the young woman, Lisa, who reported a deeply disturbing recurrent dream in her therapy sessions.
Oh, this dream was so vivid.
Lisa dreamt that her younger siblings, the exact same siblings she was parentified into mothering and caring for her whole life, are standing on a bridge over a river. In the dream, they throw a wooden box into the water.
Which is terrifying.
And Lisa knows, with dream logic certainty, that she is lying inside that box and that she is dead. And yet, from inside the dark box, under the water, she can clearly hear her own heart beating. And at that exact moment, the dissonance is so great she always wakes up in a sheer panic.
Because it's a paradox.
If we break down the symbolism, the dream is a perfect, heartbreaking metaphor for her internal state. It combines her unconscious, entirely forbidden rage toward her siblings for stealing her childhood. She resents them, so in the dream, they are the ones throwing her away, with the grim reality of what she had to do to herself to survive.
She had to play dead, emotionally.
She had to kill her own feelings, wishes, and demands to be the perfect caretaker. She is dead in the box, but her heart is still beating. Her true self is buried alive, but it refuses to stop completely.
And then there's Bob, a young man who dreamt of a pristine white coffin sitting alone on a bright green meadow. In the dream, Bob is terrified. He is convinced that his mother is dead inside the coffin.
A very common childhood fear manifesting.
But he gathers his courage, walks up to it, pushes open the lid, and finds that it's not his mother inside. It's him. He is the corpse. And the most startling part is his emotional reaction in the dream. He feels an overwhelming sense of relief. He feels lucky it was him and not his mother.
The sheer, brutal survival logic of a child is on full display here. Bob killed his own anger, his own needs to preserve his mother's life, or rather, to preserve her psychological equilibrium and her love for him.
Because he needed her?
Because, we must reiterate, losing the mother's love meant death to the child. Given the binary choice in his unconscious mind, he would rather be in the coffin than have his mother be gone.
A patient named Carl, who is 42 years old, gave maybe the best analogy for this I've ever heard. It really made me stop and feel the weight of this condition. He said growing up in his home was like living your entire life inside a glass house, where your mother can walk around the outside and look in at any time from any angle.
Total surveillance.
Yeah. In a glass house, there is no privacy. You cannot conceal anything. The only possible way to hide something precious like your true self, your authentic feelings, your secret anger, is to dig a hole and bury it deep underground, under the floorboards.
Which keeps it safe from the mother.
Right. But the ultimate tragedy of the glass house is that once it's buried under the dirt to keep it safe from your mother, even you can't see it anymore.
It is a profound description of self-alienation. You successfully hide from the predator, but you lose access to yourself in the process. The true self cannot communicate, it cannot grow, because it has remained entirely unconscious, undeveloped, locked in an inner prison of your own making.
So we've established the architecture of this trauma. We see how the true self gets buried alive in the cellar of this glass house. Now we have to pivot and ask, how does this buried self present itself to the adult world? If you are walking around completely alienated from your core, what does that actually look like at a dinner party or in a boardroom?
It manifests very predictably, actually.
Miller argues it usually swings between two extreme states that seem like total opposites to the naked eye, but are actually two sides of the exact same psychological coin.
Grandiosity and depression.
Let's explore the grandiose person first, because I think this is the most deceptive presentation, mostly because modern society heavily rewards this person. We absolutely love grandiosity. We put it on magazine covers.
We do, because it produces results. But internally, grandiosity is a defense mechanism against depression, and depression is a defense mechanism against the deep, unbearable pain of losing the true self.
So it's a double shield.
Exactly. The grandiose person must excel brilliantly at absolutely everything they undertake. They need to be admired everywhere they go. Indeed, they feel they cannot survive without that admiration. But here is the critical distinction. Admiration is not love.
Right. Admiration is a substitute for the early respect and mirroring they never got from their mother's face. It's a cheap imitation of love. It sparkles, but it doesn't nourish.
It is an utterly exhausting hustle. Another patient provided a brilliant physical metaphor for this. They described the state of grandiosity as the feeling of always having to walk on stilts.
I want to really linger on that analogy because it is so visceral. Imagine spending your entire life, from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to sleep, walking on wooden stilts. You're taller than everyone else in the room. You literally look down on all the quote-unquote ordinary people who are just walking on their own two legs.
You seem invincible up there.
You seem impressive, commanding, successful, but secretly, your internal experience is one of constant sheer terror. You are constantly balancing, constantly shifting your weight, terrified that one misstep will cause you to fall off your stilts and break your neck. And beneath the surface arrogance, you carry immense envy and pent-up rage toward those ordinary people below you.
I think the envy aspect is crucial to unpack. Why would someone high up on stilts envy the people on the ground?
Because the people on the ground, healthy people, don't have to hustle for their basic worth. They don't have to perform a high-wire act just to justify their existence on Earth. They can just walk on the ground. They can sit down. They can rest.
They have innate value.
Exactly. The grandiose person is never, ever truly free. They are excessively dependent on admiration from an audience, and their self-respect is entirely pegged to qualities, functions, and achievements that can suddenly fail them.
And this brings us to the inevitable collapse of the false self. What happens when the stilts inevitably break? Because aging happens, illness happens, market downturns happen.
It's catastrophic. The fall isn't just a setback, it is an annihilation of the self. Miller gives the example of an aging, world-famous photographer. He has won international awards, his work is in museums, he's achieved the ultimate societal validation. But he confesses in an interview, "I have never felt what I have done was good enough."
A bottomless bucket.
He has absolutely no idea why he feels this persistent dissatisfaction. He rationalizes it, thinking it's just a quirk of his intense artistic drive. But Miller points out it's because all those shiny awards are just substitute gratification. A gold medal cannot retroactively fill the gaping hole left by a missing, unmirroring parent.
Or consider the example she gives of the stage actor. At the absolute height of his success, he plays the lead role before a rapt, enthusiastic audience. In that moment on stage, bathed in applause, he experiences feelings of heavenly greatness, almightiness, absolute grandiosity.
He's on top of the world.
The mirror is huge and reflecting perfectly, but the very next morning, he wakes up in his bed feeling completely empty, futile, and even strangely ashamed and angry. Why?
Because it wasn't real love.
Because the audience's applause was just a temporary echo. In the cold light of day, the audience is gone. The former child he once was no longer exists, and the parents who failed him no longer have that power over him. The present reality, no matter how glorious, cannot heal the past wound unless the past is consciously, painfully mourned.
It's like trying to cure someone who's actively starving to death today by showing them a photograph of a massive banquet from 30 years ago. The picture might look nice, but it doesn't provide any actual caloric nourishment to the present deficit.
That is a very apt analogy.
I want to bring in this incredible study from 1954 that Miller references, the Chestnut Lodge study, because we've been talking in metaphors and case studies, but this really anchors the theory in hard data.
Yes, the Chestnut Lodge study is a classic piece of psychiatric research. The researchers meticulously examined the family backgrounds of 12 adult patients who were all suffering from severe manic depressive psychoses.
All 12 of them.
Yes, and the findings across all 12 discrete families were remarkably, disturbingly consistent. All 12 patients came from families who were socially isolated and felt they were not respected enough in their local community or neighborhood.
So the parents themselves felt fundamentally inferior. They had a chip on their shoulder.
Precisely. And so the family unit made special, coordinated efforts to increase their prestige through rigid conformity and demanding outstanding achievements from their offspring.
The kids were the project.
The child, who later became the psychiatric patient, had been assigned a very specific, heavy role in this family drama. The child was essentially drafted to guarantee the family honor. They were loved only in direct proportion to the degree to which they fulfilled the intense demands of this family ideal.
It might be through their special academic abilities, their athletic talents, their physical beauty, whatever currency the parents valued.
Exactly.
And if the child failed,
Yeah.
if they got a B instead of an A or lost the game.
They were severely punished, not necessarily with physical violence, but by being emotionally cold-shouldered, frozen out, or symbolically thrown out of the family group entirely, burdened with the devastating knowledge that they had brought great shame on their people.
So the mania we see in these patients is the desperate, grandiose, high-speed scrambling to achieve and secure the family's precarious love. And the depression is the inevitable collapse when the child's body and mind give out and they realize that no matter what they do, they are not loved for themselves. It's a purely conditional, exhausting transaction.
It really is.
It makes you look at your own life differently. If you're listening to this right now on your commute, or if you're working late at night, pushing yourself to the brink, you have to ask yourself a hard question. Are you running toward a goal that genuinely brings you joy and fulfillment? Or are you running away from the deep, unconscious terror of being unloved if you stop achieving? Are you walking on your own two legs, or are you terrified of falling off your stilts?
Which naturally leads us to an important, almost sociological question about where all this hyper-attuned nervous energy goes. If a child spends their entire early life developing incredibly sensitive, radar-like antennae to constantly read their parents' unconscious moods and needs, what do they do with those highly developed antennae when they grow up and enter the workforce?
Well, this is the tragic, almost poetic irony of the whole deep dive. These kids, who became master emotional detectives just to survive their living rooms, often grow up to enter the helping professions. They become social workers, counselors, and very often psychotherapists.
It makes complete logical sense.
It totally does.
Who else would muster sufficient interest, patience, and skill to spend their entire day trying to discover what is happening in other people's unconscious minds? They have been practicing this exact skill set since they were toddlers, trying to read their mother's micro-expressions.
But Miller issues a severe, uncompromising warning here.
It's a huge warning, and it shakes the foundation of the psychiatric field. She says that if therapists do not face their own repressed history, if they don't do the brutal work of mourning their own lack of primary love, they will inevitably unconsciously exploit their own patients to get the echo and approval they have been craving since infancy.
Because the dynamic of therapy places the patient in a very similar position to a child, right?
Exactly. The patient is vulnerable, dependent, seeking guidance, and looking up to the therapist. If a therapist secretly needs to feel powerful and in control to manage their own anxiety, they will unconsciously foster dependence in the patient.
They'll keep them sick.
Or if a therapist desperately needs to feel successful and admired, they will subtly pressure the patient to have rapid, dramatic, quote-unquote, miraculous breakthroughs, essentially forcing the patient to produce a new false self just to please the therapist.
So the therapist uses the patient as a substitute parent to validate them, or a substitute child to control, perpetuating the exact cycle of use they suffered.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's generational trauma passing down blindly, hands operating in the dark. And it doesn't just happen in the sterile environment of therapy, it happens mostly in the messy reality of parenting.
You brought up Pestalozzi from the text, the famous Swiss educator, which illustrates this so tragically.
Yes. Johann Heinrich Pestalozzi. He was a pioneer in pedagogy and education, globally renowned for his incredible ability to give genuine warmth, care, and fatherliness to orphan children. He was a savior to hundreds.
Right.
But his own childhood was heavily marked by early fatherlessness and profound emotional neglect. And the bitter tragedy of his life is that while he was a saint to strangers' orphans, he horribly neglected his own son. His son suffered deeply, was eventually considered mentally defective despite being born an intelligent child, and died tragically at the age of 30.
Pestalozzi could give to strangers what he fundamentally couldn't give to his own flesh and blood, because the intimacy of his own child triggered his own unresolved, blocked trauma.
Yes.
He actually recognized this curse before he died. He wrote this haunting line: "You can drive the devil out of your garden, but you will find him again in the garden of your son."
If we don't clear the basement of our own glass house, our children invariably inherit the ghosts. Miller gives us some very specific, nuanced generational case studies to show exactly how this invisible transfer happens in the real world. Let's look at the case of Robert.
Robert is 31 years old. As a child, he realized very early on that he could never be sad. He could never cry or throw a tantrum. If he did, he realized it made his beloved mother incredibly unhappy, panicked, and unsure of herself.
He had to protect her.
Right. He felt her physically and emotionally warding him off when he expressed negative emotion.
Why?
Because his mother was a concentration camp survivor.
And she had never spoken about it to him when he was young. It was a complete silent void in the house. It wasn't until Robert was an adult that she finally told him her story. She had been one of 80 young children in a camp. She had to stand there and watch her own parents go into the gas chambers.
Unfathomable trauma.
And she noted to Robert that during that horror, not one single child cried. Because in the camp, crying meant drawing the attention of the guards. Crying meant immediate death. Cheerfulness, a flat, compliant, invisible survival state, was the specific trait that saved her physical life.
So, decades later, living in a safe suburban home, her own son's normal childhood tears unconsciously triggered her primal trauma.
It threw her right back into the camp.
To her nervous system, tears still meant imminent death. They threatened her equilibrium entirely. She literally couldn't tolerate his sadness without feeling like she was back in the camp.
So Robert, being this extremely sensitive, attuned child, spent his whole childhood trying to be perpetually cheerful to protect his mother from her invisible demons.
But his true self, his normal spectrum of human emotions, anger, sadness, fear, were strictly banned from the house. Where did that massive emotional energy go? It can't evaporate.
Miller notes that Robert developed strange, obsessive sexual perversions. He could only express glimpses of his true, chaotic self through these perversions, which seemed alien, confusing, and shameful to his conscious mind.
So it leaked out sideways.
It wasn't until therapy helped him grasp their real origin that he understood. They were the distorted, high-pressure escape valves for a banned emotional life.
It is breathtaking how trauma morphs and disguises itself. The parent has absolutely no defense against passing it on if they refuse to face their own history, and the child has zero defense against receiving it.
There's another example Miller gives that really highlights how insidious the disguise of quote-unquote good intentions can be, the story of the storytelling father.
This one is particularly unsettling because, on the surface, to anyone watching, it looks like engaged, creative parenting. This father, when he was a small child himself, had been frequently terrified by the severe, unpredictable anxiety attacks of his periodically schizophrenic mother.
And no adult ever explained to him what was happening to her. He was just left alone, a small boy alone in a house with a terrifying, erratic adult.
Fast forward a few decades, he is a father to a young daughter. He loves telling her stories before bed, but specifically, he loves telling her gruesome, incredibly scary stories.
Which is an odd choice.
When the stories frighten her to the point of tears, he laughs gently at her fears, hugs her, and comforts her, saying, "But it is only a made-up story. You don't need to be scared. You are safe here with me."
Let's break down the incredibly painful psychology operating beneath the surface here. Consciously, if you asked him, he genuinely believes he wants to be the strong protector he never had. He thinks he is giving his child comfort and rational explanations.
But unconsciously.
The mechanism is dark. He is actively manipulating his child's fear to make himself feel strong and needed. He is passing his own unresolved childhood dread, his ingrained expectation of disaster, directly into his daughter's nervous system.
He manufactures terror in her just so he can swoop in and play the savior.
Exactly. Finally answering the question he never got answered as a terrified little boy: why does this person I love frighten me so much?
The father is playing both the monster and the hero. He's the source of the fear and the savior from it. He traps his daughter in a reenactment of his own unmourned trauma. This begs the ultimate question.
How do we get out?
How do we break the cycle? If being highly successful doesn't fix it, and even good intentions can just be masks for passing on trauma, what is the actual path out of the glass house? Miller says it starts by ruthlessly rejecting convenient illusions, even the ones that sound beautifully spiritual, deeply forgiving, or culturally approved.
This leads us into what was, and still is, one of her more controversial points. Her fierce, uncompromising critique of the concept of grace in psychiatric healing and trauma recovery.
Yes, she specifically targets a well-known psychiatrist who wrote a book claiming that some severely abused people heal faster than others simply because of divine grace or the intervention of a higher power.
The psychiatrist in the book cited a specific patient to prove his point. This patient was a boy who had lived with his single mother in extreme poverty for his first year of life. Then, due to circumstances, he was taken by the authorities and placed in a series of horrific, highly abusive foster homes.
A terrible childhood.
Yet, as an adult psychiatric patient, he healed surprisingly fast compared to others with similar backgrounds. The doctor confidently labeled this God's grace.
But Miller asks the critical, deeply uncomfortable, logical question. Why would God ignore the other patients on the ward? Furthermore, why would God ignore this specific boy while he was being mercilessly beaten for years in those foster homes, only to grant him grace on a therapist's couch 20 years later?
Right. It makes absolutely no logical sense, and it's intellectually lazy. Miller points out the real, prosaic, grounded reason for this man's resilience. That boy, despite the poverty, had 1 full year of real, attuned love, security, and mirroring with his biological mother before he was ripped away and put into the abusive system.
So his foundation was solid.
Yes. His foundational integrity, his true self, was established in that critical first year. He had a core self to return to during therapy.
Exactly. And Miller's point is that relying on grace is a dangerous cop-out. Ignoring the reality of that first year allows psychiatrists to avoid facing the devastating, determinative reality of early infant trauma.
It's much easier for a doctor to throw up their hands and say, well, it's just a mystery of grace, than to look at a case like Beatrice, whose mother trained her to suppress hunger at 3 months old, and admit that the foundation of the house was entirely destroyed before the walls were even built.
Clinging to spiritual bypasses excuses the medical community and society at large from doing the incredibly hard, depressing work of tracing the trauma all the way back to the crib.
And this demand for spiritual bypassing, this pressure to just forgive and forget or find a higher meaning, extends to how we treat adults in recovery, too.
Miller shares a letter from a woman named Vera, who was 52 years old. Vera's story really struck a chord with me. She was a recovering alcoholic who had also developed multiple sclerosis. She attended Alcoholics Anonymous meetings religiously every week for 11 years.
She was very dedicated.
But eventually she realized that a core tenet of the group's philosophy was actually making her deeply internally angry.
The group's persistent demand that she accept and trust their unconditional love.
Yes, she was sitting in these church basements, surrounded by relative strangers, and she was supposed to believe that all these people loved her unconditionally, and she felt immense guilt because she just couldn't trust it. Her sponsor told her it was because her dysfunctional family broke her ability to trust, and that she needed to pray harder to accept the group's love.
But through intense, honest therapy with Miller, Vera realized her gut intuition was right all along.
Let's break down Vera's realization, because it challenges a very popular warm and fuzzy cultural narrative. Miller asserts that as adults, we do not need unconditional love.
Unconditional love is strictly a childhood need. A baby absolutely needs to be loved unconditionally. Whether they're smiling, screaming, or vomiting, the parent must care for them. But for full-grown adults, expecting to love a serial murderer or a notorious liar or even just a deeply toxic person unconditionally just because they join your support group or happen to be in your family is not love.
No, it's not.
It is hypocrisy. It is willful blindness to reality.
It's forced compliance disguised as saintliness. Vera realized that the unconditional love offered in the meetings was actually highly conditional. It was conditional on her being obedient to the steps, compliant with the group consensus, and playing along with the shared narrative without questioning it.
It was the exact same stifling dynamic she had endured with her manipulative, demanding mother.
Good therapists and healthy adult relationships in general do not offer unconditional love. They offer honesty, reliability, boundaries, and deep respect.
If a therapist or a guru or a partner promises to love you unconditionally no matter what you do, Miller says you should run in the opposite direction because they are operating out of their own lack of awareness and their own desperate need to be a savior.
So what does this all mean? If we strip away all the comforting illusions, if we can't be saved by massive career success or by spiritual grace, or by finding a surrogate parent who loves us unconditionally, how do we actually heal the fracture?
It means accepting that healing isn't about finding a substitute. You cannot outsource the repair. Healing is about engaging in what Miller formally calls post-ambivalent mourning.
Okay, let's pause and define that because it sounds like clinical jargon. Ambivalence means holding two opposing feelings at once,
Yeah.
right? Loving your mother because she's your mother, but hating her for how she manipulated you. So post-ambivalent mourning means breaking that deadlock.
Exactly. As long as you are ambivalent, you are stuck. You make excuses for them like, she hit me, but she had a hard day. Post-ambivalent mourning means finally dropping the excuses.
Just facing it head on.
It means entering therapy and finally allowing yourself to experience the raw, unedited rage, the profound grief, and the deep, bottomless sadness that you were cheated out of a true childhood. You have to mourn the hard fact that the parents you desperately needed never existed, and you can never, ever go back in time and get those years back.
It's essentially attending a funeral for the child you never had. She talks about a patient named Peter to illustrate this. Peter is a successful adult. He had a pediatrician for a mother, someone very respected.
Yes.
In a therapy session, Peter suddenly experiences a flashback. But it's not visual, it's emotional. He
Yeah.
experiences himself entirely as a 2-year-old being fed by the maid alone in the kitchen. He connects viscerally with the toddler who is sitting there thinking in despair, why does mom prefer the sick kids at the hospital to me? What is fundamentally wrong with me?
He touches the core wound.
Peter cries bitterly in the session, but Miller notes, it's not just a cathartic release of tears, it's an integration.
He is integrating the isolated toddler who actively hated his mother for leaving him. Before this, Peter had always idealized her. She was a great doctor. She saved lives. Through the grueling process of mourning, that frozen, idealized portrait melts into the reality of a flawed, unavailable woman who couldn't give him continuity.
And by finally feeling the long dammed-up rage against her, he is finally liberated from her ghost. He stops his adult pattern of compulsively conquering and then cruelly deserting women in his romantic life because he is no longer unconsciously acting out his repressed rage at his mother onto substitute targets.
And doing this grueling work is what finally breaks the generational chain. Look at the story of Maja.
Right. She comes to therapy after feeling completely exploited, drained, and suffocated by her first 2 babies. She felt they were deliberately taking advantage of her, which, of course, is exactly how she felt about her own mother's emotional demands when Maja was a child.
She was projecting her mother onto her infants.
But after doing this brutal work of mourning her past, of feeling her rage at her own mother, she has her 3rd child. And she tells Miller that with this 3rd baby, the entire experience is radically different. She feels entirely free. The love just comes of its own accord.
She isn't performing motherhood, she is experiencing it. She can enjoy spontaneous unity with the child. She stopped the ghosts from entering the nursery.
She cleared the cellar of her glass house so her child could finally live in a home with solid walls.
Exactly.
We have covered so much heavy, profound ground today. We've looked at how the perfect child is so often an empty adult, constantly balancing on stilts. We've explored how the body keeps the precise biological score of unwept tears, from a 3-month-old suppressed hunger to a 10-year-old's manufactured terror.
And we've seen that mourning our true history, facing the ugly, painful truth of our emotional exploitation without making excuses for our parents, is the only way to finally step off the stilts and walk on the ground.
It is a long, arduous journey, from the false self to the true self. And it is vital to understand that it is not a homecoming, because the true home never existed in the first place.
Yeah.
It is the courageous creation of a home for the very first time.
That's beautifully said.
Before we leave you today, the learner, we want you to mull over a bizarre, somewhat dark, but deeply truthful story that Alice Miller includes from the 19th century French writer Alphonse Daudet. It's a short fable called The Golden Brain.
The story goes like this. Once upon a time, there was a child born with a brain made of solid, pure gold. His parents only discovered this miracle by chance when he injured his head as a toddler, and gold instead of blood flowed out of the wound.
Which is pretty surreal.
From that day on, they guarded him jealously. They wouldn't let him play with other children for fear he would be robbed. They kept him isolated, telling him it was for his own protection. When the boy grew up and naturally wanted to go out into the world to live his life, his mother stopped him at the door. She said, "We've done so much for you. We protected you all these years. We ought to be able to share your wealth."
So the obedient son takes a large chunk of solid gold out of his own brain, gives it to his mother, and leaves.
He goes out into the world, he makes a friend, and lives in great style, paying for everything. But the friend eventually robs him in the night and runs away. So the man, feeling the physical loss in his head, resolves to keep his secret hidden and go to work because his reserves are dwindling.
It's slowly running out.
But then he falls in love with a beautiful girl. She loves him too, but she mostly loves the lavish, beautiful clothes and gifts he buys her. He marries her, happily carving away at his brain to make her smile, but after 2 years, she dies. Heartbroken, he spends the rest of his wealth on a splendid, monumental funeral for her.
He gives it all away to people who just wanted what he could provide.
Finally, he is creeping through the city streets, physically weak, utterly poor, and deeply unhappy. He sees a beautiful little pair of boots in a shop window that would have been perfect for his dead wife. Because his empty brain no longer works properly, he forgets she is dead.
Oh, man.
He enters the shop to buy the boots, but in that very moment, as he reaches into his head for the last coin, he falls to the ground. The shopkeeper walks over and finds a dead man lying on the floor, his skull entirely emptied out.
Daudet actually wrote this story while he was slowly dying of an agonizing illness of the spinal cord. He wrote that there are people in this world who have to pay for the smallest, most basic things in life with their very substance, with their spinal cord, with their golden brain.
Which leaves us with a lingering, provocative question to consider. Does not mother love, does not parental care belong to the indispensable free things in life? Why do so many people paradoxically have to pay for it by giving up their living selves? Look at your own relationships, your own drive, your own exhaustion. Are you paying for the love and approval in your life with pieces of your own golden brain?
Let that sit with you tonight. Look inward. Stop ignoring the knowledge stored in your own cells, because that psychological X-ray machine might be broken, but your body remembers the fracture perfectly. The jagged white line is there, buried under the floorboards, waiting for you to finally see it, feel the pain of it, and set it right. Thanks for joining this deep dive.